After 17 years of absence in a foreign land, he finally returned to Korea. Before him lay a scene shrouded in mist with a cold, desolate building standing as a witness to the buried past. This was not just a return, but the beginning of a journey of revenge and uncovering the truth where all painful memories would be unearthed from the very start. Before him were two urns of ashes, the last remains of his parents, Haejeong and Sunyeok. The silence in the funeral hall made time seem to stand still while the pain silently gnawed at his heart. This was not just a farewell, but the start of a vow. Those responsible for this tragedy would have to pay. The young man stood silently before the memorial portrait, his eyes firm but filled with pain. After 17 years, he had returned, not to lament, but to begin a journey of revenge. The cold question slipped out from the smiling lips: what is the value of a life? To him, it was no longer sacred, but merely the beginning of a plan calculated long ago. Fear filled the eyes of the child, a suffocating feeling when caught between life and death, when everything familiar suddenly vanished. The violent storm that night was like a fateful verdict. 17 years ago, at 10:32 p.m., the boy was swept into tragedy in the sea as the giant ship rocked in a lightning bolt that tore through the sky. In the raging sea, the boy panicked, struggling in the freezing water, desperately calling out for his parents in vain, a heart-wrenching scream amidst the fateful storm. Thunder tore through the night sky, lightning flashed across the rain like a foreboding omen of the disaster that had befallen the boy's life. In the torrential rain amidst the dark ocean, the boy helplessly screamed for his parents, his cry echoing through the storm like it was tearing apart his heart, but all that was met was an endless, cold emptiness. Despite the huge waves and the roaring storm, the boy swam frantically in desperation, his eyes gleaming with a desperate determination, as if he would not give up hope of finding his family again as long as he had a breath left. Amidst the white veil of rain, the boy froze upon seeing a dark figure drifting limply ahead. His heart was as if gripped by extreme fear, knowing that this could be a truth he never wanted to face. The boy struggled in the icy water, crying out for his mother in despair as his trembling hand reached out to the familiar hair, a fragile hope amidst the nightmare that was engulfing everything. Within the swirling, violent waters, the boy clung to his mother's lifeless body. Between the darkness and the stormy sky, the pain was evident on his young face as he touched his beloved parent for the last time. Amidst the raging storm, the boy, having just escaped the water, trembled as he clung to the black rock, his panicked and painful eyes gazing towards the dark sky where his family had just vanished forever. A desperate cry tore through the stormy rain. The boy, with eyes full of panic, reached out to grab his mother, but a violent wave suddenly swept in, pulling him away, completely separating him from his loved one in the nightmare of the sea at night. The small body sank gradually into the cold depths of the sea, his eyes still wide with utmost fear, unable to close. The boy struggled in vain in the deep water, as if still holding on to the hope of finding the embrace of his parents who had forever departed. In a moment of life and death, the boy endured the cruel sensation of suffocation. Despite being surrounded by despair, his eyes burst with life. He had to resurface, had to keep living, even if there was only a glimmer of hope left. In the cold, dark heart of the ocean, the boy struggled among the sinking bodies, his small hands reaching up in despair, as if fighting against a cruel fate. Life was now just a faint light above him. Small air bubbles slowly rose in the deep water, drawing the gaze towards the faint light above, where the hope of survival seemed to be fading away. A static frame, yet heavy with emotion, like the last breath dissolving into nothingness. In the dark waters, the boy panicked, swimming among the lifeless bodies floating around him. The light from above shone down, reflecting on his young, fearful face. It seemed he was the only survivor, struggling at the thin line between life and death. In the deep, cold waters, the body of a man drifted silently, his face smeared with blood, still holding a strange smile, as if carrying a secret he never got to reveal. The faint light from the surface only added to the eeriness of this moment. Around the boy were numerous lifeless bodies floating in the dark sea. Blood spread in the cold blue water, creating a scene both tragic and horrifying. Outstretched hands seemed to be grasping at life that had slipped away. The boy opened his eyes wide, frozen in shock as he stared ahead. His eyes were filled with panic and astonishment as he discovered something in the deep water that was beyond anything a child could imagine. The air seemed to freeze, as if his breath was being squeezed out by the revelation. In the cold and dark water, the boy's eyes widened as he saw his parents' bodies sinking, their clothes stained with blood like haunting marks. The harsh reality hit him like an undertow. They were gone. The cry, "Dad! Mom!" was choked back in despair, buried deep beneath the ocean of memories. The boy stretched out his hand in desperation in the cold heart of the ocean, his panic-stricken eyes clinging to a final glimmer of hope amidst the water that was squeezing the life out of him. There were no more calls, just fear and the instinct to survive, driving him toward the distant surface. Just as the boy was about to exhaust his last strength, a man emerged from the rain and the raging waves, grabbed the boy tightly and shouted loudly, "Calm down, Taeha." The intensity in his voice and the firm grip pulled the boy back from the brink of death. In the midst of the fierce storm, the man reassured the boy, his eyes firm and full of life. "Good, you're still moving, aren't you?" Amidst the swirling waves, his voice was a lifeline, pulling Taeha out of fear and despair. Taeha looked up in panic through the pouring rain, his shaking voice calling out in desperation, "Grandpa." The horror was evident in the boy's eyes as his fragile life seemed to be drowning in the stormy sea and sky. Chairman Jin Seok, now 72 years old, despite the rain, wind, and raging sea, clung to hope with determination. In the midst of danger, he raised his head, silently thanking heaven, for at least it seemed that fate had not yet turned its back on them. Amidst the roaring waves, Taeha choked back a scream to his grandfather, tears mixing with rain. He had just seen his parents still underwater. But his grandfather's response was cold and desperate, extinguishing the fragile hope. He knew it was too late to turn back. In the chaotic sea and sky, Jin Seok gripped Taeha's shoulder tightly, his eyes piercing through the rain like a knife. With a gravity he had never shown before, he told his grandson to listen carefully, for what he was about to say would change Taeha's life forever. Taeha was taken aback by his grandfather's words amidst the rushing water. Though his heart was filled with pain, Jin Seok entrusted him with a sacred wish. Taeha was to be the future heir of Cheonggu. In that moment, the fate of a child took a turn toward a path full of challenges and destiny. His grandfather handed Taeha a fountain pen, a small object carrying a great responsibility. It was not just a symbol of inheritance, but also a key to finding the person who could protect him in the future. Lawyer Kim In-soo. Amidst the raging waves, a glimmer of hope was passed on. In the pouring rain, his grandfather tried to convey his final message to Taeha, not to trust anyone and to go to a secret place as soon as he set foot in Korea. But the sentence was cut off by a fateful wave. Taeha could only scream out in panic, "Grandpa." Amidst the raging storm and rising water, Taeha cried out in despair, begging his grandfather to save his parents first. His eyes were filled with tears, staring into the dark water where his parents were still sinking, his young heart shattering with helplessness and fear. Jin Seok silently clenched his fist, his body drenched in water and blood amidst the raging storm. Though his body was severely injured, his eyes still showed determination and deep sorrow as he was forced to make an irreversible decision. Taeha's eyes widened in horror, tears indistinguishable from rainwater. He stammered out a choked, "Grandpa," as if he couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes, a terrible premonition tearing apart his young heart. The boy was stunned, his eyes wide open in despair as he heard the cruel truth. His shaking hand clutched the object his grandfather had left behind, his heart shattered amidst the waves. The loss was no longer a vague fear, it had become a harsh reality beyond salvation. He let go. The final words echoed like a will. "Taeha, you must live, no matter what." Amidst the roaring storm, the warm hand slipped out of reach, leaving the child alone on the cold sea surface with the burden of survival and a future full of hatred. Taeha screamed out in despair amidst the pouring rain as his grandfather's hand slipped out of his grasp. The moment of parting was torn apart by the raging waves and choked sobs, marking the beginning of a child's solitary journey amidst the ocean and a destiny full of loss. Taeha turned back amidst the raging waves, his shaking eyes catching a glimpse of his grandfather, who was slowly sinking into the darkness of the sea. That moment was frozen in time amidst the storm as the two were separated forever in an irredeemable tragedy. A bolt of lightning tore through the pitch-black night sky, illuminating a fateful moment like a declaration of destiny. The thunder boomed like the cry of the earth and sky, witnessing the sacred last words Taeha had just received. Tragedy? willpower, and burden were beginning to be etched deeply into the young boy's fate. The gentle light of dawn seeped through the emerald-green water, casting upon Taeha's innocent face as he drifted silently amidst the vast ocean. The aftermath of the tragedy still lingered at the corners of his eyes, but in this rare moment of peace, the boy who carried his family's last testament had officially embarked on a journey of survival, carrying both pain and hope. He was the sole survivor and the destined heir. Taeha's face now seemed to have let go of everything, the pain of losing his parents, his grandfather's sacrifice, and the storm he had just endured. He lay still in the crystal-clear water, his eyes half-closed as if in a dream, but the tranquility on his face revealed a deep-seated pain. This was not the end, but the beginning of a fate that had been entrusted to him. The boy's eyes slowly opened amidst the dazzling sunlight reflecting off the water. Despite being exhausted and drained, his eyes still shone with life, a faint spark of awareness amidst the tragedy. It was as if his soul had been pulled back from the brink of despair, with his grandfather's final words still echoing in his heart. Taeha, you must live at all costs. Taeha suddenly woke up in the calm sea and sky after the storm, looking around in bewilderment. The debris floating in the azure water brought back memories of the brutal past. Although his body still trembled and his eyes were not yet steady, something unusual caught his sight, making his small heart tighten. A feeling of unease surged once more. An enormous ship loomed before Taeha, the sunlight reflecting off its metallic surface like a witness to a fateful turning point. The clock read 1:51 p.m. in the Gulf of Aden, a milestone marking a moment of life and death on the high seas. Taeha, tiny amidst the turbulent water, opened his eyes wide, looking up at the ship. Hope surged, mixed with lingering fear. A new life was about to begin, but what he had lost would forever be etched in his heart. A ray of light shone through the windswept long hair, revealing the face of a man with an enigmatic smile. His eyes, hidden in the shadows, exuded confidence and calculation. The appearance of this man signaled a new chapter full of turmoil about to unfold in Taeha's life. It was unclear whether he was a savior or a looming danger. Taeha fell hard to the ground, his body still trembling from exhaustion and shock. His eyes opened wide in panic as he suddenly regained consciousness, as if he had just escaped from a prolonged nightmare in the ocean. His soaked clothes, disheveled hair, and rapid breathing reflected the unsubsided horror. A new journey was beginning, but now the young boy was left all alone. Two foreign men in protective gear, holding guns, looked down at Taeha with surprise and curiosity. One of them, a blond man, chuckled lightly, "Oh, the kid's still alive?" Meanwhile, the clear blue sky and the containers in the background painted a clear picture. Taeha had been rescued onto a cargo ship, but this place didn't seem entirely safe. The atmosphere was both relieved and uneasy because from the looks and weapons of these men, things were only just beginning. The blond man immediately turned around and shouted loudly, informing his superior, "Capo. The kid's awake. He's not dead." His eyes widened in a mix of surprise and urgency, signaling that Taeha's survival was unexpected. The clear blue sky in the background contrasted sharply with the chaos they had just experienced, highlighting this moment of life and death. It seemed that Taeha's awakening would trigger new turmoil. As Taeha regained consciousness, he found himself face to face with a tall man holding a gun, making him jump in alertness. A strange but logical thought crossed his mind. Is he Italian? Perhaps because of the man's accent, appearance, or how the others addressed him as capo, a term commonly used in the Italian mafia. A sense of danger loomed, but Taeha tried to remain calm to assess the situation. The blond man turned around again, shouting "Capo" with urgency as if to report something important to their leader. The seriousness in his eyes and voice indicated that the situation had gone beyond expectations, especially since the boy they thought was dead had survived. The atmosphere on the ship's deck was tense, with all eyes focused on Capo, the powerful figure who had yet to reveal himself. A voice boomed from above, "Come here." The man known as Capo had finally spoken. Standing on the ship's crow's nest, he exuded authority and power as if controlling the entire situation from the top. The dazzling sunlight shone down on the deck, but his voice was as cold as steel, leaving no room for hesitation. The encounter was about to begin, and it would not be simple. Taeha sat slumped on the floor, his eyes still dazed and disoriented from the nightmare he had just experienced. One of the two guards, a red-haired man with a tattoo on his neck, bent down and spoke in a tone that was somewhat softer than usual. "Kid, can you understand us?" Meanwhile, the other guard turned his back and sighed in frustration. "Gosh, she's up there again." It seemed that Keipo was a special figure who stood apart and controlled everything from a distance. Amidst the unfamiliar atmosphere and strange words, Taeha began to realize that he had fallen into the hands of a completely new and unknown force. A close-up of the red-haired guard revealed a strange tattoo on his neck, a symbol resembling a stylized ship's steering wheel, looking both ancient and menacing. The angled light cast a shadow that divided his face, making his half-smile even more mysterious. The appearance of this tattoo could be a sign that he belonged to a distinct organization, possibly pirates or an armed group with underground power. The boy's face was stern, his sharp eyes gleaming with caution and determination, an expression not typically seen at his age. Despite being soaked and exhausted after the ordeal, he gritted his teeth to remain calm, as if trying to memorize the tattoo on the man's neck. This was a crucial turning point, from a panicked child to someone harboring a will to survive and initial doubts about the world he had been drawn into. Against the bright blue sky, a figure suddenly plummeted from the towering ship's mast. The daring action and extraordinary speed made everything seem frozen in a moment. The woman, whose identity was unclear, had jumped without hesitation, bringing with her a burst of intense and mysterious energy, signaling the arrival of a character who should not be underestimated. This was a moment when the balance could begin to shift. The woman landed on the deck like a black lightning bolt, her knee firmly planted on the ground, her long hair flying wildly with the force of the fall, causing the floor to shake with a loud Kong sound. The boy in front of her froze, his eyes wide with amazement as he stared at the woman who had just descended as if from the sky. Without needing to say a word, her imposing presence and decisive action proved that she was not someone to be taken lightly. A turning point was unfolding before the boy's eyes. The tall woman, with a cold and stern demeanor, leaned down and looked straight at the boy with a mix of suspicion and caution in her eyes. The sea breeze whipped her black vest, causing her long hair to flow like an iron whip against the blue sky. Her question came out like a command. "Kid, how did you get on our ship?" A tone that was both interrogative and warning. Clearly, to her, a mysterious child appearing in the dangerous waters could not be a coincidence. A blond man reported with a naive expression, "Keipo, I think this kid doesn't understand us." Immediately, from above, Keipo, the powerful woman from earlier, erupted in anger. "Then go find someone who can use body language or someone who can translate." The small commotion on the ship's deck further indicated that the boy was in an unfamiliar environment, where everything was beyond his control. The boy stood silently, his eyes lost and anxious. Sweat trickled down his cheekbones, his blue eyes reflecting unease as he failed to understand what those around him were saying. His expression was both bewildered and cautious, as if trying to guess what would happen next in this unfamiliar and tense situation. The boy trembled as he recounted, a yacht was attacked when it passed by, causing the group of adults to freeze, their eyes turning serious. The woman smiled sharply, confirming, "The kid understands us." Then she leaned down and asked directly, "Where are you from?" The boy looked up, his eyes welling up with tears but remaining resolute. "I'm Korean. When the storm came, people with guns boarded the yacht, killed my parents and grandfather." The woman narrowed her eyes, smiling with a hint of intrigue. "So you fell into the sea and then were brought onto an Italian ship? Our Salerno family's ship?" The boy was taken aback, his eyes wide open, his breath seemingly caught in his throat, unable to respond to the woman's probing question. The group of adults laughed loudly, as if the strange story the boy had just told was nothing more than a joke. The woman emphasized, "And not just anywhere, but right in the Gulf of Aden, the Middle East." The atmosphere suddenly turned peculiar, making the boy feel even more lost among these strangers. The woman drew her sword, the cold metal glinting in her hand. She smiled faintly, saying bluntly, "Sorry, but we don't intend to believe in such an overly coincidental story." The air immediately became tense and threatening. Regina Salerno, the head of the Salerno family's commercial branch, coldly drew her sword, looked down at the boy, and asked, "Hey kid, what reason do we have not to throw you back into the sea?" The boy froze, his eyes wild with fear as he stared at the sword tip pointing directly at his forehead, sweat dripping down in fear and helplessness. His throat constricted, the boy tightened his lips, trying to remain calm on the thin line between life and death. A drop of sweat slowly rolled down his cheek, reflecting the rising fear in his heart. The boy hesitantly held out the fountain pen and whispered, "This was a keepsake my grandfather gave me." The woman was momentarily taken aback. The boy declared confidently, I am the grandson of Chairman Jin Seoko of Chonga Group, Korea, the eldest son of Jin Sunyeok. The boy said, returning me to the group will be more beneficial to you than throwing me into the sea. She was taken aback. Chonga Group? The boy remained silent, his determined gaze meeting the woman's skeptical eyes. Regina ordered urgently, quickly check the news from Korea. The man asked, do you know any other languages? The boy looked puzzled. Huh. The boy replied, yes. Cantonese, English, Japanese, Arabic, Spanish, Hindi. Esperanto. I can speak basic phrases in those languages. Ma'am, here's the news from Korea. The three of them focused intently on the phone screen, their faces tense with a mix of strain and surprise. The woman smiled with great interest, a mysterious spark in her eyes. The woman said sternly, if you can contact someone in Korea, keep this fountain pen. Give it to lawyer Kim In-soo and he will help you. Please contact someone else. Don't contact my family. 1:12 a.m. Seoul, Korea. The man picked up the phone and said, hello? He adjusted his tone and said, since it's international, feel free to speak in English. Regina called and said, have you seen the photo I sent? We're holding the valuable grandson of the group. Should we send him back to Korea? The person in Korea calmly sipped his drink and asked, what do you want? She smiled with satisfaction and made a demand. $10 million. Cash delivery at Russell Trade in the Panama Canal. You have 24 hours. Come in person. I'm busy too, can't waste time talking. If you pay enough, I'll release the person immediately. He put down his glass, coldly picked up the mic, and prepared to give orders. He lowered his voice and counteroffered. $1 million. The man shouted amidst the chaotic party, kill the kid and I'll pay $1 million. He yelled into the phone, kill him within 5 minutes and send me the video. I'll transfer the money immediately. He hesitated, worried. What if I kill him and you don't pay? The villain angrily retorted, you think you can negotiate with me? I can transfer $1 million to you with just 3 clicks. The villain threatened, if you don't kill the kid, I'll expose you as the attackers and pin all the blame on you. He reported back, I've relayed the message. I've contacted the mercenaries around here. Don't worry. The mysterious man sat silently in the darkness, sipping his drink slowly, the fading sunlight casting a cold glow on half his face. The boy stood frozen, his bewildered eyes fixed on the bright phone on the table, surrounded by darkness that felt like a tightening web. The boy's trembling eyes reflected extreme fear as he faced a truth he couldn't bear. The boy muttered softly, his gaze shifting from fear to calmness, as if he had understood the situation he was facing. The woman declared coldly, her eyes sharp as a knife, I've got no more reason to keep you alive. The boy trembled, fell to his knees and begged, please, spare me. The boy stared intently, his voice lowering, do you know what that means? From the start, they planned to kill you to seize power. In my world, this is all too familiar. The boy's shocked and panicked expression as the harsh truth hit him. The group jeered, surrounding the trembling boy in the room, heightening the tense and desperate atmosphere. The boy's legs trembled violently, unable to stand steadily due to extreme fear. The boy gripped the pen tightly, his hand shaking but his eyes burning with determination. A subordinate rushed in, alerting, Capo, we've got an attacker, causing chaos in the room. The subordinate shouted, 3 speedboats and an armed helicopter. All are armed. Armed helicopter? Is it Interpol? No, they're not responding to radio calls. They're ignoring radio calls? Who's crazy enough to do that? She turned back to the child with a cold gaze, her face tense due to the unexpected situation. She gritted her teeth, suspecting that the Korean was searching for the child from the previous call. The boy bravely stabbed the pen into his hand to create an escape opportunity. All 3 were stunned by the boy's bold action. The boy trembled but stood firm, declaring, killing me is pointless now. The woman glared angrily, while the boy clenched his fist, blood dripping from the wound, unwavering. The boy held out his bloody fist with a determined gaze, accept me. As long as I have the power to avenge, I'll be loyal forever. Salerno's tattoo. When did this kid see it? She burst out laughing at the boy's request, her eyes full of contempt. She joyfully ordered a party to be held while the boy stood silently, his hands still bleeding. She asked coldly, her sharp eyes fixed on the boy, who was trembling with his head bowed over the blood on the table. She gazed deeply into his eyes, confirming one last time, "You want the power to avenge, even if it means being stained with blood?" In the heavy downpour, the boy screamed desperately, "Taeha, you must inherit Changgu." The boy clenched his fist, his eyes filled with determination. She smiled, amused by the boy's resistance. She kicked open the door and ordered, "Follow me." From now on, the boy's life belonged to Salerno. Live and die for the family. With her head held high, she faced the armed helicopter, ready to step into battle. Taeha stood frozen on the ship's deck, his eyes wide with shock as he looked up at the sky, blood dripping from his hand. 17 years later, Taeha appeared, mature and confident, with cold eyes and a self-assured smile. No body was found, but this was still the only place for him to pay his respects to the deceased. The young man smiled quietly before the resting place, his eyes reflecting a mix of serenity and deep determination. His eyes suddenly wavered, noticing something unusual in the silence. A car sped towards him in a tense moment as if it wanted to shatter the stillness. A burst of gunfire shattered the rear window and he dodged the bullets by a hair's breadth, his cold eyes filled with killing intent. The hail of bullets tore through the glass wall and the urn, shattering everything and sending shards flying everywhere amidst the deafening explosions. A group of assassins stepped out of a black car, simultaneously aiming their guns and firing without hesitation. One of the assassins, enraged, stamped his foot and cursed his companions for missing the target. Lee Jang-gu, the security manager of the Changgu Group, ordered a search for the CEO. Lee Jang-gu was furious, unable to believe that someone dared to kidnap the CEO of the Changgu Group and expected to survive. A subordinate reported that they had found the suspect's car, just as manager Lee Jang-gu had described. The people from Changgu emphasized, "We must ensure the CEO's absolute safety." A violent explosion destroyed both the car and the surrounding area. Blood splattered behind the manager as one of his subordinates was killed right in front of him. The man in green descended from the sky, swinging his sword with both hands, blood splattering everywhere across the battlefield. The Changgu manager stood stunned, looking down at the deep gash in his abdomen, his face filled with outrage. The manager panicked, realizing that his bulletproof vest couldn't withstand the previous blow. An enraged attacker charged forward, cursing his opponent for being cowardly. The young man turned around coldly and retorted, "It's not your turn to judge." The young man unleashed a powerful spinning kick to his opponent's back, a swift counterattack that caught the enemy off guard. A deadly hook sent blood spraying as the opponent crashed to the ground midair. Empty eyes, blood stained behind. He had realized his impending death. Covered in blood, he stood silently in the night. He had completed his revenge. With a calm expression still stained with blood, his revenge was complete. Leaving the flames behind, he walked away without looking back. He got into the car, the flames and black smoke still swirling behind him. He opened the paper bag, his cold eyes filled with calculation, his cheeks still smeared with dried blood. He stepped out of the car, carrying the paper bag, and walked resolutely across the empty parking lot. The bound man trembled, begging for mercy, while Taeha coldly opened the trunk, his eyes showing no hesitation. Kim In-soo, the former lawyer of Changgu Electronics, frantically justified that he was just following orders. Taeha opened the trunk, revealing a mysterious golden armor inside. Money scattered around the figure amidst desperate screams. $1 million. CEO. He smiled coldly under the light shining on his blood-stained face. The money promised 17 years ago seems to be overdue. The man stuttered in panic. Damn it, $1 million. A cold voice echoed through the microphone. The metal lighter opened with a click, a cold light flickering in the sleeve of his vest. The blue flame reflected on the vest fabric, creating a tense atmosphere before the impending action. The lighter's flame illuminated the frightened man's face, his words revealing a revenge predetermined by the past. He coldly raised his hand, the flame from the lighter surging. The end was near. The lawyer screamed in despair as the flames consumed his body amidst the pile of money. Taeha walked through the burning flames, his expressionless eyes watching his enemy scream in agony. Taeha stood before the burning car, smiling lightly as if he had finally shed his burden. Taeha lit a cigarette, whispering his name and his parents, his eyes filled with a vengeful emotion. Taeha bowed his head, the flame of the lighter whispering, "Sorry for being late." Black smoke swirls up to the sky, ashes fluttering under the sunlight piercing through the clouds, a conclusion both tragic and serene. Taking slow steps among the corpses and smoke, he takes a drag on a cigarette, his eyes calm amidst the bloody hell. A peaceful morning in the neighborhood with a clear blue sky, modern buildings and puppy pet stores lining the street, marking the beginning of a seemingly ordinary day. The male protagonist appears, his face cold, wearing a black mask, his sharp and focused eyes fixed ahead as he rushes in at high speed, a sign that a tense confrontation is about to unfold. Two men in suits, armed and shouting in anger upon discovering the protagonist's intrusion. One yells, "You maniac! Who do you think this is?" And the other orders, "Kill him." The scene instantly turns fiery and dangerous. The protagonist charges between the two bodyguards, delivering a fatal blow in an instant, blood splattering everywhere, leaving no chance for resistance. The protagonist's cold gaze cuts through the blood, reflecting his resolute and calm demeanor amidst the chaos. The protagonist walks coldly among the dead bodies, his hands still clenched around the bloody knife, his figure exuding an aura of an unstoppable avenger. The protagonist approaches an employee wearing protective clothing, who is frightened and sitting on the floor, blood still on the table and file cabinets, the atmosphere tense and suffocating. The man in a blue shirt, his face panic-stricken, sweating profusely, looks up trembling and stammers, Who sent you?" Fear evident in his eyes. The man shouts in desperation, trying to warn, "You don't know who we work for. It's Chonggu, you fool." He continues to threaten, "Do you think you'll be safe after this?" Attempting to salvage the situation by mentioning the power behind them. The young man calmly wipes the blood off his knife, his eyes cold and indifferent, reminding Holdings, a private security company hired by Chonggu. His statement clearly shows that he is fully informed and unafraid of the power behind them. The man tries to remain calm, revealing, "Our task is to protect the secrets of Chonggu's directors and key executives outside work hours, especially in the Gangbok area. Most of their time outside of protection duties is spent monitoring the private lives of those who oppose Chonggu, including journalists and whistleblowers. They carry out kidnappings, assaults, murders, and other violent acts under contract, essentially functioning as a professional criminal organization." The two bound individuals struggle to break free, making desperate, futile attempts to resist. The masked man stands coldly, throwing the knife to the ground in front of the two bound hostages, his gaze full of menace. He orders the three hostages to leave and warns that no one is to reveal that they saw him. A flash of red against a white background signals the sudden appearance of a new character. The three bound individuals, now freed, sit stunned around the fallen knife on the floor, still shaken by what just happened. An elderly man, knife in hand, approaches the masked young man, his eyes hesitant as if contemplating something, suddenly heightening the tension. The elderly man shouts thanks as he makes a hasty escape, but his rushed action draws the attention of the captors, catching the masked young man off guard and prompting one of the henchmen to shout in response to the chaos. The white-haired young man turns back upon hearing the shout, "Hui," his face bruised and his eyes full of anger. The man in a blue shirt frantically asks if the attacker is a relative of the victims amidst the scene of death and bloodshed in the office. The masked man makes a phone call, stating that it's hard to talk with the others still there. He requests the schedule of high-ranking executives for the week, emphasizing that emergency meeting directive number 1 has been issued. The panicked man refuses to disclose information, fearing he will be killed along with his family if he talks. He threatens to gouge out the other's eyes if he doesn't confess, asking him to raise his hand if he wants to talk. The building screen displays news that the Chonggu Elephants team has made it to the Korean series finals for the 12th consecutive time. A group of homeless people gather to eat on the stairs in the morning light, surrounded by trash, empty bottles, and posters stuck to the wall. A dead cockroach lies on its back on the tile floor, surrounded by scattered leaflets in the daylight. A man steps on the dead cockroach, crushing it underfoot. The protagonist contemplates smoking Korean cigarettes instead of cigars because cigars would be too conspicuous in the crowd. A city traffic scene with the sound of car horns. He has returned to Korea after a long absence. But this country has gone mad. The president addresses the public, promising benefits for all citizens, a populist promise amidst social chaos and contradictions. The president declares strongly to the nation, vowing to use all constitutional powers to wage war against crime and violence, a resolute political promise amidst social turmoil. While passionately declaring the eradication of crime, the president faces the very reality he denies. The president, who had declared war on criminal organizations, is assassinated shortly after his speech. The year 1990 closes a term in blood, warning that the war against the darkness is not won by mere rhetoric. Following the president's death, no one dares to stand up to restore order. The police gradually collaborate with private organizations and the country sinks into a vortex of violence and money. Amidst a seemingly peaceful society, he walks silently, a man carrying a bloody past, returning to where it all began. Changa colludes with criminal organizations to manipulate the media and eliminate opponents. Right now, in front of him, walls are plastered with faces backed by money and violence, lies that have become the new norm. The manipulated media has made people forget about politics. Even if a dog were to run for president, they would trust and vote for it as long as it was marketed skillfully enough. Among the flashy skyscrapers, the ramshackle slums sit next to them like a deliberately forgotten stain. Yet, people still believe that Cheonggu is a corporation of the people. A blind faith amidst a harsh reality of polarization. The young man steps through the glass door, his eyes cold and his demeanor calm, as if he is familiar with every false mask in the society, a tranquil presence carrying an impending storm. He walks into the convenience store, greeted with a casual, everyday smile. But no one knows that the person who just passed the counter is the epicenter of an impending wave that will sweep away this artificial order. With a cold expression, he hands over money to the counter staff, requesting a pack of cigarettes. Not just any cigarettes, but a specific kind, potentially a sign of a much larger plan. The counter staff looks at the young man handing over the money, a dubious expression on his face. He can't understand why the request is so peculiar, but still tries to serve, showing the growing strangeness in the air. His cold eyes light up in the space with a serious and confident air, as if nothing around him can throw him off course. Both of them hand over money almost simultaneously, their eyes meeting in surprise and challenge. The seemingly harmless competition inadvertently reveals a deep, unexplained connection between the two mysterious men. The air between them suddenly becomes as tense as a bowstring. Their eyes lock, the tension silently enveloping the surrounding space. There are no words, just a silent confrontation between the two men, each holding a secret yet to be revealed. They stand still, but inside they are calculating wordlessly. The female staff member smiles awkwardly, slightly nervous as she informs the customer. This scene contrasts sharply with the tension and danger enveloping the space, where difficult decisions and dark secrets remain unexposed. His sigh seems to shatter the air around him, revealing the frustration and tension weighing heavily on his shoulders. In a world full of schemes and crime, one cannot simply overlook things, and those decisions are still waiting to be made. Despite being the first to arrive and clearly not lacking money, he voluntarily yields to someone else. Not because he is weak, but simply because trivial things are not worth occupying the mind of someone with much larger plans. He smiles smugly, thinking he has just won a small victory. But he doesn't know that what he has just been given is just a cigarette, not worth bothering about in the game the other person is quietly setting up. As soon as he steps out the door, he is blocked. A cold, black-clad man stands in his way, his tone polite but his eyes as sharp as a knife, signaling the start of an unfriendly conversation. Everything is part of his plan. He smiles faintly, extending his hand with a courteous gesture but unable to hide the calculation in his eyes. A seemingly harmless suggestion, just one cigarette, is a way for him to probe the other person's reaction. Every step, every word is carefully considered like a chess piece on a large board. The young man in a brown jacket bursts out laughing, half joking and half challenging. The response seems casual, but his eyes contain a hint of vigilance, as if he is testing the other person's reaction. In an unofficial contest, every word can be a subtle attack. The protagonist flashes a vague smile, his tone indifferent but not lacking in charm. He says he bought cigarettes just to try once, but his sharp eyes and confident demeanor make it hard to believe his words. The scene shows the man lightly waving his hand, a confident gesture, his face elated without hiding it. He steps out of the store as if everything is under his control, carrying an unpredictable and captivating attitude. He gently takes out a cigarette, his cold eye scanning it. A fleeting question, do you remember this tasteless thing? He stands watching the receding back, his tone casual but full of hidden meaning. You'll get caught smoking here. Remember to use the smoking room. A light warning, but it makes the other person pause for a moment. After 17 years of navigating the mafia world, he no longer needs anyone to teach him how to hold his head high or how to hold a cigarette to show others. This is someone you don't mess with. With just one glance, he can gauge the other person's position in the power hierarchy. 17 years have not dulled this instinct but made it sharper. The other man just stands there, saying nothing, but the pressure he emits makes the person facing him feel a chill. Experience tells him that this person is not an amateur. In that brief moment, he silently compared the other person to the monsters he had faced in a foreign land. A question flashed in his mind. Could it be that in South Korea, talented and formidable individuals are so easily encountered? He turned his head slightly, his eyes cold but with a hint of interest. After many years in the underworld, it was rare for anyone to make him turn back. But this time, things seemed to be getting interesting. As the setting sun cast a fiery glow over the room, a man in a yellow jacket silently stepped through the splattered blood. Bodies were scattered everywhere, and the stench of gunpowder and charred flesh filled the air. Without hesitation, he calmly moved forward as if this were just another ordinary day in the world of a cold-blooded killer. He stood amidst the chaos, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his cold eyes piercing through the hazy smoke. The bloodstains on the wall and the bodies at his feet only accentuated the arrogance and danger emanating from a man accustomed to living in the shadows. The sword at his waist gleamed with a silent yet absolute warning. In the blood-stained room with flickering lights, he sat down, his cold eyes surveying the pile of bodies at his feet as if inspecting a heap of garbage. A half-burned cigarette hung from the corner of his mouth, his hand clenched tightly in silence. No words were needed, his aura as a killer told it all. His eyes were as sharp as a blade as he glanced over the bodies below and whispered his assessment. The cut was just right for perfect sashimi. It was an instinct born from living too long in a blood-soaked world. He gently touched his finger to the still warm pool of blood, leaving a smudged trail in the air. No words were necessary. That single gesture was enough to confirm that he was no stranger to the stench of death. Amidst the blood-stained room, he slowly pressed the phone to his ear, his voice as calm as if he had just woken up on a peaceful morning. Yes, it's me. The simple statement made everything around him colder than the corpses at his feet. While bodies still lay scattered at his feet, he stepped out of the blood-soaked room, nonchalantly holding the phone to his ear. His voice carried a hint of irritation. What's going on? I told you not to call at this hour. The person on the other end reminded him of a meeting, but his expression remained unconcerned, as if there were no boundary between killing and everyday work. He coldly issued an order over the phone, his eyes still indifferent amidst the bloody scene. No hesitation, no wavering, just a decisive, postpone it. For him, all schedules were flexible except for the purges. On the deserted rooftop, the sniper rifle still lay, cold and precise. Under the slanting afternoon light, the body of a woman slumped on a chair, unable to react. The man who had killed Vice Chairman Kim In-soo was now targeting a new victim. No one knew who he was, all they knew was that this time he had come for a different name. As the wine-red sunset faded, the man sat calmly, but the eyes behind him gradually darkened upon hearing the bad news. The security company that was supposed to cooperate today had lost all contact. When his men arrived, all they found were blood-soaked corpses in a dark room. A conspiracy had begun, and he was the next target. In the suffocating space filled with files and dried blood, he sat beside the body of a fallen guard. His sharp eyes scanned the deep wound, his low voice concluding, this was a lone attack carried out with just one sword. The ruthless precision indicated that the perpetrator was not only strong but also extremely skilled. He leaned forward, the ember of his cigarette casting a suggestive smile on his face. His voice was soft but firm, like a dagger thrust into the listener's heart. The killer of Vice Chairman Kim In-soo was no ordinary person, and he knew exactly where the secret meeting took place. A warning was veiled under a layer of calm, deadly intent. The wine glass lightly touched the table, producing a crisp sound amidst the tense atmosphere. The man behind it didn't flinch. With a firm tone, he reiterated the tradition of the Chonga clan, an unchanging rule: in times of crisis, all branches of the clan must unite. It wasn't an explanation, it was an unspoken command. He leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed as if everything were just a joke. The tradition of the Chonga clan was a closely guarded secret, passed down within the family, yet the other party knew and had acted first. His words seemed surprised, but at the bottom of his eyes was a cold vigilance. Because of this, he had no choice but to assign a secret task to the other party, demanding they uncover the infiltrator in absolute silence. He placed his hand on the bleeding wound of the severely injured man, his tense eyes following each faint breath, trying to find any remaining clues. As his fingers touched the blood, a familiar name burst from his mind, Blade. On the street corner, the young man in black smiled amiably, asking to borrow a cigarette. His polite demeanor hid something dangerous. He pulled out a cigarette from the pack with his left hand, revealing a scar on the back of his hand, a memory of a once ruthless individual. The person couldn't be an ordinary individual, wounds like that only appear if one has wielded a sword and survived countless battles. In the darkness, Cheon Heemin wondered, is there anyone else in the family strong enough to wield a sword that he hadn't known about? The man standing outside sneered, my family? They're useless, they can't even cut an apple properly. Cheon Heemin was taken aback. Unable to refute or deny, he silently accepted the order along with a hefty sum of money to guard the place. Light streamed in through the slightly ajar door, illuminating the floor littered with corpses and fresh blood. Cheon Heemin stepped in, his eyes cold. Although reluctant, he accepted the offer. However, his voice was firm, I'll come, but enhance the security. Cheon Heemin hung up, visibly irritated. His face twisted in annoyance at being given orders, but he ultimately acquiesced to the directive. As soon as he ended the call, he vented his frustration on the bodyguard beside him, muttering arrogantly. In his eyes, taking orders from others was an affront. While adjusting his tie, he heard a strange noise behind him. His sharp instincts immediately put him on guard. He rushed into the meeting room, unable to hide his surprise at seeing the chairman already seated there. Cheon Heemin exited the dark alley, phone in hand, reporting the situation. He confirmed he would withdraw after completing the temporary support task. Accused of betrayal, he was perplexed. His expression was a mix of disbelief and anger, as if he couldn't believe his loyalty was being questioned. Despite his initial hesitation, he walked away resolutely. 100 million was the price that made his hesitation disappear, leaving only determination to complete the contract. The call continued, this time a vague warning about an imminent danger. His face was somber and he began to feel uneasy. He ended the call with a resolute expression. Although unclear about the details, he kept his promise to explain later, his demeanor calm and cold. A stranger emerged from the shadows. His casual remark about one stick not being enough filled the air with suspicion. The game had begun. A young man in black leaned against the wall, his eyes cold. He emphasized that encountering someone with such skills near the scene couldn't be a coincidence. He had been tracking his target for a long time. Cheon Heemin laughed bitterly, holding his head in exasperation. Today was a day of humiliation, losing medicine, being followed, and being outsmarted. He gritted his teeth, half laughing and half angry, pointing out that he wasn't foolish. This was the first time he'd been played like that. Both began to close in on each other. Under the streetlights, their heavy footsteps echoed tensely. A question was about to be asked. The opponent's eyes gleamed, directly asking, "Who are you?" The atmosphere was icy, enveloping the alley. Cheon Heemin maintained a smirk. He pointed at the opponent, responding nonchalantly that he was just helping with something, nothing serious. The opponent didn't respond. Up close, his eyes flashed with caution and readiness to act. The figure in black drew both swords from his belt. His stance was fluid, ready for confrontation. There was no turning back. The swords clashed swiftly. The two faced each other inches apart. Their expressions were stern and resolute. Cheon Heemin's eyes widened, his pupils constricting. He was taken aback by the opponent's reaction and strength. His eyes opened wide, flashing with utter astonishment. In that moment, all calculations vanished, leaving only instinctive caution against a completely unexpected opponent. The cold blade tore through the air, descending like a whirlwind. He gritted his teeth, enduring the slashes that cut through his flesh, but his eyes never wavered. The real battle had begun. Both swung their swords in a fateful moment. One leapt down from the sky like a thunderbolt. The other looked up, countering with a decisive slash. The swords intersected, sparks flying in the dark night, marking the beginning of a merciless battle. He gripped the hilt tightly, his eyes tense but unwavering. Under the fluttering cloak was the determination of someone who refused to lose. He had to win this battle. The sword sliced through the wind, carrying condensed murderous intent. A slash without hesitation, enough to make the enemy hear only the whistling wind before being swept into a cold steel storm. The blade sliced past the wall, leaving a long, brutal scar. He leapt up, his survival instincts kicking in, narrowly avoiding the attack in a hair's breadth between life and death. As soon as he dodged, he counterattacked with a surprise move. Metal pipes shot out from his hand like rain, tearing through the air towards his opponent, his eyes showing no hesitation. He leaned to dodge the attack by a hair's breadth, but what fell before him left him stunned. The steel pipe had been cut. He didn't even notice when. His face stiffened, his eyes reflecting the sharpness of a silent slash. The deserted alley was filled with the remnants of the battle, but the enemy had vanished without a trace. His suspicious gaze swept through the darkness. Where did he go? Under the dim light, he bent down, panting heavily, with cold sweat soaking his forehead. His unfocused eyes looked down at something protruding from the ground. That was wriggling. Both of them charged down like two sharp blades tearing through the night, each landing a fatal blow, as if by unspoken agreement, striking at the very line between life and death. In the moment the blade was about to strike, his eyes blazed with a mixture of shocking killing intent and anger. Although he had just escaped danger, he still managed a defiant smile, the kind of smile that someone who knows they are always living on the edge of misfortune and death would make. Under the cold, blue moonlight, he stood still, his hand tightly gripping the hilt of his sword, his eyes following the figure of the strange person who was hovering in midair, a creature that didn't belong to this world. A nagging question echoed in his mind. Why did those monsters keep targeting people like him?
The assassin swooped down like a ghost, his sword clutched tightly in hand, ready to strike a fatal blow. The young man below remained oblivious, unaware that death was closing in right behind him. Recognizing the danger closing in from behind, he gritted his teeth and cursed, his hand clenching the hilt of his sword. There was no retreat. The battle had officially begun. He swooped down from above like an arrow released from a bow, swinging his sword forcefully to finish off his opponent. But the black-clad man reacted just in time, dodging the attack in an instant and sliding across the dangerous ground. The attack from above descended like a scythe of death, but the black-clad figure managed to twist his body to avoid it, then flipped backward and slid along the ground, driven by momentum. The situation was becoming increasingly tense. Blood still flowed from the wound on his chest, his body crumpled to the ground, devoid of any strength to resist. The man in the black vest turned, drew a knife, and walked away with a cold demeanor, not bothering to look back. He turned his head, his cold eyes revealing a hint of caution. His voice was not loud, but it was enough to serve as a warning. It was better for the person facing him to be cautious with their next actions. He glanced at the corpse lying motionless in the dark alley, his eyes gradually growing colder. The unusual nature of the incident made him unable to consider it just an ordinary accident. Although blood still stained his collar, he smiled defiantly. His hoarse voice rose like a warning that he was not dead yet, and revenge might have just begun. He turned away, his voice as cold as tempered steel on a dark night. For him, rules were not meant to be compromised. They were for survival and for eliminating the right targets. His eyes were as sharp as a razor, and his voice rang out like an absolute command. There would be no pursuit, no interference. Cross the boundary just once more, and the price to pay would be one's life. Lying limp in the darkness, he still couldn't understand that this time being spared was the final warning. He lowered his head, his eyes quiet but not hiding a cold undertone as he uttered a phrase, as if the debt of life and death was just the price of a cigarette. Lying in a pool of cold blood, he slightly curled his lips in a sarcastic smile, exchanging a cigarette for his life. The profit was too bitter. Under the cold moonlight, the final words echoed between the concrete walls. The value of a human life, cheap to the point of being heartbreaking. The car sped through the night, cutting across the chaos behind it. One survivor, one left behind, and a warning that might not be the last. Blood seeped through his fingers, but his eyes remained cold. The wound wasn't deep, and the mission wasn't over yet. Despite the blood still flowing, he gripped the steering wheel tightly. Pain was pushed aside. As long as he could move, he wouldn't stop. His blood-stained fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead for the final stretch. The revenge that had been brewing for 17 years was finally about to begin. Though the blood hadn't stopped flowing, his gaze didn't waver. The clock was ticking down, and he knew that in just 32 minutes, everything would be over. Blood splattered everywhere, his eyes wide with panic. There was no warning, no chance to resist. Death came like a blade tearing through the silence. 17 years ago, amidst the splattering blood and stifled screams, he could only watch as tragedy struck too quickly, too ruthlessly, and was beyond salvation. Amidst the blood-soaked scene, his mother's desperate scream was the last shield protecting Taeha's innocent eyes, but the memory had already etched deeply into the depths of his mind. In that tragic moment, Taeha broke free from his mother's arms, his cry of "Dad" tearing through the night, as if trying to cling to something that had already slipped away forever. In the room reeking of blood and gunpowder, the young Taeha stood frozen, witnessing his father shielding him, facing the enemy's gun. CEO Jin Sunyeok, his face smeared with blood, shouted in the midst of chaos, his final words before fate swept everything away. Under the pouring rain and the echoes of gunfire from behind, Taeha was dragged away in despair, his young heart unable to accept the permanent separation. The scream that tore through the night made both of them freeze for a brief moment, but it was enough for the horror to be deeply etched into Taeha's memory forever. The masked men retreated in chaos, leaving behind screams, bloodshed, and a child with memories that could never be erased. The young boy trembled, calling out for his mother in the pouring rain, his innocent heart not fully understanding the tragedy, but the fear had already seeped into his very bones. His mother bent down, her eyes stern as she instructed him in the pouring rain, placing all hope of survival on the young boy. She smiled one last time, hiding her despair behind gentle eyes, entrusting her child with the most sacred command: to live. In the dark moment, a brutal command rang out. The perpetrator didn't need a reason, just corpses and explosions. The young boy was stunned in the midst of the chaotic storm. The thing that dazed him the most was his mother tongue. The soldier didn't hesitate, raising the gun barrel. The cold reflection in the red lens signaled a shot that would end everything. She screamed in despair, her eyes blazing with urgency, urging the young boy to escape before it was too late. Taeha ran with his head down along the train corridor amidst the heavy rain, his heart weighed down by the shout behind him and the fear in front of him. Taeha looked back in the downpour, his panic-stricken face shouting desperately in vain, knowing that no one could answer him at that moment. With a bitter throat and tears mixed with the rain, Taeha kept running, as if he could leave the tragedy behind. In the midst of the violent storm, the train shook violently, as if it was about to sink into hell along with the secrets that had yet to be revealed. A deafening explosion tore through the rain curtain, and flames engulfed the train, completing the cold-blooded purge. Amidst the heavy rain, a lifeboat drifted quietly away from the smoldering wreckage, the only fragile life left after the night of slaughter. In the darkness of an isolated mansion, the Chung family gathered with a chilly and calculating atmosphere. Jin Juhi, the eldest daughter, with a sharp gaze behind her wine glass, was the first to raise questions about the death of director Kim In-soo. Jin Jae-song, the second son, casually joked about the chaotic private life of the deceased as if it were just a dinner topic. When the dinner table turned into a battlefield of words, Criticisms were aimed directly at private lifestyles, exposing the shameless nature of each person. Jin Jongwon, the youngest son, was not concerned with tragedy or morality. He was only interested in the remaining shares. A hand slammed on the table among those who were jesting, signaling the arrival of someone who would disrupt all compromises within this powerful family. In the quiet mansion, the secret family meeting began with a cold, silent word. No one dared to speak when the one who truly held power spoke. Jin Gyuho, the eldest son of the Chung group, leaned back behind his wine glass, his deep voice issuing commands. A mere nod was enough to silence all excuses, leaving only a cold report from the next person. Jin Chung stepped forward in the tense atmosphere, his bright smile as if this were just a casual stroll. No one knew what he was hiding beneath his harmless appearance. Under the faint light by the dock, the last survivors were dealt with without hesitation. All leads were cut off. The truth now remained only in the hands of the strong. Jin Chung smiled lightly, concealing his ruthlessness behind an innocent face. Meanwhile, Jin Gyuho's eyes remained sharp. He knew that in this family, no one acted without calculation. Blood splattered in an instant. Without warning, without hesitation, the cold shot ended the life of the person standing opposite, as if it were something that had to be done. The atmosphere in the dining room instantly froze. All three people were stunned, their panic-stricken eyes directed towards the source of the gunshot, as if they had just heard the tear of the false facade they had maintained for so long. Mr. Jin Gyuho asked in a deep voice, his cold eyes as if tearing apart the silence. The concern about the Haejeong faction could no longer be ignored. Between the flickering lights, he bowed his head, blood soaking half his face, but his lips remained tightly shut. No words of justification, only silence full of resentment and endurance. He smiled brightly, as if the blood spreading on his forehead didn't exist. His tone was light, but the language was chilling, casually mentioning the name of the person who had been dealt with like a trivial joke. The silence was shattered by Jin Gyuho's thunderous punch, without warning, without hesitation. Jin Chung's head exploded in an instant, like the most brutal sentence amidst a dinner table that was supposed to be a family gathering. Jin Gyuho pinned his son against the wall with white curtains, the blood underfoot still wet. His voice was low, but the anger in every word was as sharp as a knife. Not knowing who the culprit is, losing track of him for over 24 hours, and then reporting it to the Haejeong faction. What are you playing at? He growled, his hand clenching a broken wine glass in anger. If the chairman and Sunyeok hadn't died 17 years ago, a useless person like you wouldn't have had a chance to step into this house. Beneath his blood-soaked hair, his eyes gradually changed color. Veins bulged, and killing intent seemed to burn everything. The anger was no longer contained. The blood on his forehead was still wet, but the smile on his lips shone brightly as if nothing had happened. He raised his head, his eyes arrogant. The troublemaker would be caught within 12 hours. She curled her lips, her eyes mixed with sarcasm and indifference. Despite the bloodshed, despite the storm approaching, he remained the same, arrogant, loud, and never changing. They leaned in close, their whispered words carrying confusion and concern. Despite the eldest son always being humiliated in front of everyone, he was, after all, blood within this house. A cold gaze pierced deeply like a knife. Not because of hatred. The unexpected words made the other person pause. A different truth was being revealed. He stood in the darkness, his mouth curling into a slight smile amidst the still-wet bloodstains. They say it's something terrifying. The air sank, as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to surface from the depths. As he stepped out of the darkness, he stretched out his hand coldly. "Hand over your phone." The brief command was laced with pressure, causing the person opposite him to freeze, not daring to resist. He stood before the camera lens, phone in hand, and used his other hand to wipe away the blood on his face. The action was strangely calm, as if he were preparing for a call more important than the life just lost. The secretary responded curtly, her eyes calm as if everything was part of the plan. "They're ready." No further words were needed. They were just waiting for the final order to act. He smiled in satisfaction, licking the blood on his lips like someone addicted to the sensation of chaos. His voice trembled with excitement, but his eyes remained as cold as ice. "How thrilling! I wonder how he'll show up, Tilda." The car sped through the night, its tires gripping the road tightly as if carrying an impending fury. There was no more time for hesitation. The real game had begun. For 17 years, he had relentlessly hunted down every trace of Chungu, uncovering secrets and ghosts, bringing them all to light. For the fateful day, there could be no forgiveness. As combat helicopters thundered across the sky, the young woman stood steadfast on the ship's deck, her back straight, holding two short swords. Her gaze was fixed upward, as if the past was replaying the day the Salamo clan brought her back, and a bloody fate began to change course. Before the funeral ended, the seat of power had already found a new occupant. Jin Gyuho, the eldest son, smoothly took over the shares and ascended to the chairmanship, as if everything had been prearranged. Jin Gyuho did not miss the opportunity. When the crime suppression campaign failed and society descended into chaos, he quickly exploited the power vacuum to expand his influence in the shadows. To consolidate his power, Jin Gyuho did not hesitate to collaborate with other forces, including the Haejeong faction, a clandestine alliance with significant influence among the financial elite. The basement of the mansion was the site of secret meetings, a family tradition maintained since his grandfather's time. Whenever there was a crisis, everyone was required to be present. He clenched his teeth, his eyes blazing with fury piercing through the darkness. From start to finish, the rules within the family had never changed, and he wouldn't allow it to. Blood stained his clothes, but he gripped the steering wheel tightly, his anger outweighing the pain. He knew it was all just a bloody play to secure a place within the system his grandfather had built with blood and rules. His eyes flashed with suppressed anger, his parents, and even himself had once been pawns in that ruthless game of power. The security guard monitoring the control room frowned. On the surveillance screen, an unidentified car sped toward them at an alarming rate, a sign that a storm was about to hit. Head of security, Kang Min-ho frowned upon receiving the unusual signal. No one was scheduled to arrive, yet the system had triggered an alarm. Unease began to spread like gunpowder catching fire. The unidentified car hurtled toward the main gate at a dangerous speed. Before the security team could react, the threat was already at the doorstep. Security Chief Kim Gwan-soo reacted immediately as he saw the car speeding wildly toward them. His face tense, he shouted into the radio, "Raise the barriers." They couldn't let anyone breach the perimeter now. The automatic barriers rose from the ground, emitting a cold mechanical sound into the night. The main entrance was now completely blocked, ready to confront the reckless driver. Undeterred, the driver stepped hard on the gas. The engine roared, the tires screeched, and the car, like a cornered beast, charged straight at the newly raised barriers. Amidst the extravagant party, cold sarcasm cut through the air like a blade hidden in wine. They laughed and spoke, but every word was aimed at the person who had lived in weakness. In their eyes, calculation was a useless trait for the defeated. In the dark cockpit, gloved hands gripped the safety belt tightly. No words were needed. That simple action spoke volumes. He was ready to take on an entire family. The sound of the collision shattered the night. The car crashed into the steel barricade without hesitation, as if the body was merely a tool for the rage screaming within. In the silent darkness, steel glinted under a cold hand. He drew his knife without hesitation, as if ready to sever everything with a single stroke. The car crashed into the barricade, its body shattering with the sound of breaking metal. There was no turning back. The intruder had chosen the most violent way to make their entrance. The headlights swept across, accompanied by the roar of the engine, causing the bodyguards to look up in shock. Someone had charged into the lion's den, sending a clear and singular message. Like a blade piercing through the veil of night, he charged into the encirclement. Every strike was a cold declaration, no warning, no mercy. In the moment the blood-stained blade flashed, his eyes gleamed like cold steel. The one who was once pushed aside had returned with uncontainable fury. The crashing sound echoed through the room, shaking its very foundations. In the midst of a peaceful banquet, panic suddenly descended upon them, but they had no idea who the storm that had just arrived was. A strange noise coming from the main gate froze the atmosphere in the room. The members of the family stopped eating, their suspicious eyes converging on the direction from which danger was approaching. The man chuckled softly, as if he had just realized something. His eyes narrowed with amusement. He knew very well who was arriving. Jin Chung remained seated, his eyes never leaving his wine glass. His voice was calm, but it sent a chill down the spines of everyone at the table. He knew exactly who had just arrived and had no intention of stopping them. The man was taken aback, his lips trembling as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Panic was evident on his face. He had no idea that the storm had truly arrived at the doorstep. The entire hall erupted into chaos in an instant. Jin Cheng and the members of the Jin family were caught off guard, surrounded by strangers with guns pointed directly at them. The butler was silenced before he could even speak. The power they once held was now nothing more than a shadow. Jin Sina jumped up in panic, her voice trembling as she struggled to believe her eyes. Her eyes were wide with fear, her hand raised instinctively as if to protect herself from the sudden threat that had descended upon them in the middle of what seemed like a peaceful banquet. Jin Gyuho roared with anger, unable to accept that he was being betrayed by his own bodyguards. He stood up abruptly, his eyes filled with shock and rage, shouting out in the midst of the chaos that had engulfed the dining room. Jin Gyuho sat silently at the dinner table, his back straight, his cold eyes fixed on the guns pointed at his family members. Without needing to turn around, he controlled the situation, a predator watching its prey struggle in vain. The air was thick with tension, all eyes on the man who once held absolute power. Jin Gyuho clenched his jaw, his eyes burning with anger and resentment as he stared at Jin Chung, the one who was betraying him right before his eyes. His anger was boiling over, but he remained calm, unable to believe that the younger brother he had once supported would dare to turn against him in front of the entire family. Jin Chung smiled arrogantly, his eyes gleaming with mockery as he looked straight at Jin Gyuho. His voice was light, but every word cut deep into the other man's heart, a fatal blow delivered not with a gun, but with the truth that everyone had been avoiding. You knew this would happen sooner or later. Jin Chung's smile was gone, replaced by a cold, piercing gaze that weighed heavily on Jin Gyuho like an undeniable verdict. He looked straight at his cousin, his voice low and deadly. The reason you hate me, isn't it because you're afraid of losing that seat, afraid that one day you'll end up like our grandfather, replaced, forgotten? He didn't need to shout. Every word was enough to leave the other man speechless.